Well, to discuss the significance and implications of Snowden's leaks, we're hosting a debate. In Washington, D.C., we're joined by Stewart Baker, former general counsel of the National Security Agency and assistant secretary for policy at the Department of Homeland Security, a partner at the law firm Steptoe & Johnson. Baker is the author of Skating on Stilts, Why We Aren't Stopping Tomorrow's Terrorism. And here in New York, Daniel Ellsberg, former Pentagon and Rand Corporation analyst, perhaps the country's most famous whistleblower. Ellsberg leaked the Pentagon Papers in 1971, exposing the secret history of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam, prompting Henry Kissinger to call him the most dangerous man in America. The papers were published in several newspapers, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, and later published as a book. They were only officially declassified and released in 2011. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Stewart Baker, I'm sorry you're snowed in at home, but why don't we begin with you? Can you talk about what Edward Snowden did, and if you think he is a traitor?
What Edward Snowden did was quite deliberately change jobs to gather as much, perhaps millions of documents from as many places as he could around the National Security Agency, but involving other agencies as well. He stored them on a computer and handed them out to who exactly we don't know, but certainly to journalists with controls that probably make it likely that sophisticated intelligence agencies have been able to get access to them, and allowed them to be disclosed at the journalist's discretion, more or less with some guidance from Snowden. The result of that has been a massive disclosure of classified intelligence gathering that has hurt our ability to catch terrorists, to keep an eye on Iranian and North Korean and Chinese and Russian operations, and has done great diplomatic damage as well. I think that, frankly, the way that those disclosures have occurred, it's hard to view that as anything other than the intended result of his gathering that information and disclosing it as he did. He certainly disclosed some information that sparked a debate in the United States. He did that in June. But he has continued to disclose documents for months thereafter, which have no obvious policy value in terms of a debate or a concern that the United States public should have, but which have done enormous damage. And so at a minimum, I think he is someone who has violated U.S. law, done great damage, and should go to jail for it.
Traitor?
It remains to be seen. There have been people who've made the case, and in some cases fairly persuasively, that his leaks, and especially the most recent leaks, serve the interests of the country where he is located, and that either wittingly or because he was sort of tricked into it, he may have been serving Russia's interest. That would make him a traitor, but I think that's an unproven case.
But what about his argument that given the extensive nature of the surveillance that was being conducted without the knowledge of the American people, that he had a moral responsibility to speak out and to at least spark this debate?
Well, you can't, obviously, you cannot do intelligence gathering in the sunlight. You can't tell the American people everything you're doing in their name because the process of telling them also tells your targets, and it tells Hezbollah, it tells Al-Qaeda, it tells the North Koreans and the Iranians and the Russians and the Chinese exactly what you're doing. And you can't do that and continue to gather the intelligence. So there has to be a limit on what the public debates here. There also has to be a limit on what the several million people who have clearances feel they're free to disclose because they've decided that there's a problem with the program. At the end of the day, all that Snowden says he did is he kind of made some oblique remarks to his superiors saying, gee, do you think this would really look good in the Washington Post if it were known? And then he decided to release 1 million or 2 million or 3 million documents. There are whistleblower protections in U.S. law more than in any other country's law, but they provide a procedure. You need to go to the authorities, you need to go to Congress, you need to go to an inspector general and raise your concerns there. He did none of that, and his view that this was illegal has turned out to be highly questionable. All that said, yes, he has spurred a debate on that one program, and he could have spurred that debate on that one program with one document, the document that he released first. Everything he has done since then has simply caused damage, and the number of debates that have been spurred, and certainly the number of serious proposals for changing the current intelligence law is close to zero.
That's Stewart Baker, former general counsel of the National Security Agency. Dan Ellsberg, your assessment of Edward Snowden's actions, and do you think he is a traitor or a patriot?
I feel confident, as you in the clip showed earlier, that he's no more a traitor than I am, and I'm not. The notion that he joined NSA with the intention to, earlier on, or the CIA when he took the oath of service to the country earlier, that he did that with the intent to either harm the interests of the United States or to release any information, or to harm NSA, or to deprive it of secrecy. I think there's no evidence for that whatever, and I believe it's entirely false. He came to believe, as I did, having made those oaths initially and the promises of non-disclosure, which were not oaths, but they are contractual agreements not to do that, which he later violated, as I did. He made those in good faith by everything known to me, and came to realize, I think eventually, as he said, that a non-disclosure agreement in this case and the secrecy conflicted with his oath, so help me God, to defend and support the Constitution of the United States. And it was a superseding authority there, that it was his responsibility really to inform the public, because, as he said, he could see that no one else would do it. He saw the head of the NSA, but also the Director of National Intelligence, you quoted here, Clapper, lie to Congress. And actually, I think what he's mostly revealed, in particular, is not that Mr. Clapper was violating his oath in the sense of trying to deceive Congress. Clapper knew that the false statements he was making, that they were not collecting data on millions, any data on millions of Americans, were false, but he knew that Congress knew they were false, the people he was talking to, the dozen, even the man who'd asked the question, Senator Wyden. What we saw, what Snowden saw, and what we all saw, was that we couldn't rely on the so-called Oversight Committee of Congress to reveal, even when they knew that they were being lied to. And that's because they were bound by secrecy, NSA secrecy and their own rule. The secrecy system here, in other words, has totally corrupted the checks and balances on which our democracy depends. And I think I'm grateful to Snowden for having given us a constitutional crisis. A crisis instead of a silent coup as after 9/11, an executive coup or a creeping usurpation of authority. He's confronted us, he's revealed documents now that prove that the oversight process, both in the judiciary, in the FISC, the secret court, and the secret committees in Congress who keep their secrets from them, even when two of them, Wyden and Udall, felt that these were outrageous, were shocking, were probably unconstitutional, and yet did not feel that they could inform even their fellow colleagues or their staff of this. What Snowden has revealed, in other words, is a broken system of our Constitution, and he's given us the opportunity to get it back, to retrieve our civil liberties, but more than that, to retrieve the separation of powers here on which our democracy depends.
But Daniel Ellsberg, what about Mr. Stewart's, Mr. Baker's remarks that he could have just released one document or two documents that would have been sufficient to spur the kind of debate that we have now?
He talked about revealing on one program, but I like the way you put it, because what I was confronted with the Pentagon Papers 40 years ago, when I put out 4,000 pages to the newspapers and 3,000 other pages, top secret, to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. There was no Intelligence Committee at that time, which I didn't give to the newspapers at that time. When I saw the effects of that, it gave me a moral that I've been saying for 40 years. And I've been asking people, first, don't do what I did. Don't wait till the bombs are falling if you know that we're being lied into a war. Don't wait till thousands more have died before you tell your truth to Congress and to the public. But I would also say, by now, don't tell it only to Congress. I gave it to Congress a year and a half before it came out. Senator Fulbright failed to bring the hearings that he promised me on the grounds that he himself would be deprived of secret information from the Defense Department thereafter. So he waited for me to do it. If I didn't do it, it wasn't going to happen. But the other thing I've been saying for years is, I want someone to put out enough documentation to make the case irrefutable. If you bring out one memo, 10 memos, you will hear, as we have heard when the first memos came out, oh, that was rescinded the next day, oh, that just reflected one agency, one opinion. No, the Pentagon Papers showed, but unfortunately they were only history. I didn't have current documents. If I had, I would have put those out instead of the history. But what they did show was that this was a pattern of decision-making that went over 4 different presidents and was being repeated today. That took hundreds and thousands of pages to reveal, and many of those pages didn't reveal anything of great significance. I wanted it to be very clear I hadn't censored them. I hadn't taken out the one good reason for that war. I said, here's the whole history, see if you can find a good reason for it. What Snowden did, which I admire very much, is to put out enough material to show an entire pattern of behavior, and not just on one program, on a number of programs, with the implication there are many more, and that Congress needs to look into this, but not in the way the intelligence committees have done. They've been thoroughly co-opted and corrupted by this process. There has to be a new congressional investigation with new people on it, and that has to be pressed by the public. It will not happen by Congress alone.
We're talking to Dan Ellsberg and Stewart Baker. Dan Ellsberg, perhaps the most famous whistleblower in the United States, released the Pentagon Papers in 1971. Stewart Baker is former general counsel for the National Security Agency. We'll continue this debate in a moment.